This episode is sponsored by Triton Tools.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're building a split top Roubo workbench from one of my Workbench kits, and this workbench is going to be from my editor Brad, who is behind the camera today. So here we have the material we're going to use for the bench. I have a pair of bench tops as well as some base material. So the first thing we're going to do is take the workbench tops over to the surfacer and get them flat and leveled out. So those are all stabilized and ready to go. We trimmed a little bit off the ends to make them a little more manageable. Might as well just get rid of the material we're not going to surface. And we're going to do that here on the surfacing machine. This thing is a 6-inch diameter cutter spun by a 5 horsepower motor. And it's basically like a big router sled. My friend Josh makes these. And those will make really fast work of getting these things down to final thickness. Right now we're sitting at about 6 inches plus or minus. And we'll see what we end up as far as finished thickness on these. But they'll be quite a bit thicker than your standard laminated bench top, which is normally 3.5 inches thick. So we got our faces all cleaned up and paralleled, so now I'm going to work on getting these things squared up, and the easiest way for me to do that is here at the saw. I'll get them nice and square, and we'll just have to do a little bit of cleanup work to remove the saw marks later on. This will also allow us to take these down to final width. This one is too wide still, so it's got to be ripped to final width as well. So we'll square one edge of each up, then we'll gang them together and cut the other one square and parallel. Okay. I'll put them on this side to stabilize it. The bottom of this has like kind of a curved thing. So that gets this square and stable, and now just stabilize the rest of it so it doesn't go rocking and rolling all over the place. Use your head. That's probably good enough for Brad. We're just a little over width right now, enough for a cleanup pass on the jointer later on to remove the saw marks from the bandsaw. But otherwise, these slabs are squared up and ready for some more processing. So our bench tops are all surfaced and squared up, and I'm going to go in for some epoxy work now. So the first step here is going to be some penetrating epoxy, and that is going to do two things for us. It's going to stabilize these kind of mushy areas, which isn't really a huge concern for us in this case because all of these kind of softer areas are all areas that are not seen, the underside and the inside of the split, which aren't really all that important. But you know how I like to be thorough with things. The other and more important thing it's going to do for us is for the inclusions that we are going to be filling. This is going to make sure we don't have any bleed out of any of our color or anything like that into the surrounding wood. It gives us a much nicer, crisper, and cleaner look to the epoxy fills. So this stuff mixes at a 2-to-1 ratio. It's a super thin liquid, so it gets sucked right into the wood, and it will strengthen all those mushy areas, and it will seal the rest of the wood too, again, so that the colors don't bleed into the rest of the wood. That's especially going to be a problem here on maple because it's so light and blonde. It'll have a tendency to bleed fairly readily. The one fun thing about penetrating epoxy is it gives you a look with finish on it. And this is the underside, and it's got like all kinds of fun figure in it. I think I'm gonna be jealous of Brad's bench. Brad's got a nicer bench than me. How the hell did that happen? You know, the downside to this is you kind of spoil the surprise of seeing the finish go on. We're like super early in the project still, and we know what it's going to look like. Maybe that's good. It keeps you motivated to get through it because you know how good it's going to look in the end instead of not knowing the whole time. I don't know. Just some thoughts that I had in the moment here. Okay, so that's going to do it for the penetrating epoxy. We're going to let these ones cure for a bit, and then we'll be back to do the epoxy fills on all the voids. So see you in a day or so. So our penetrating epoxy has cured on our bench tops, and now I'm going to get ready to start filling in all the defects and voids to make a nice uniform smooth surface. And to do that, we're using 12 Boats High Performance. This is available in 3 different hardeners, a fast, a slow, and a medium hardener. I'm using the fast one today so we can get through this because we have fills on like every single face. So the faster we can get through this, the better for the whole production. So this one here mixes at a 2-to-1, which of course is really easy with the pumps. And just to get kind of started on this, I'm not really sure how much we're going to need. So I'm going to do, I don't know, let's do 3 or 4 pumps and we'll see where that takes us. So for the pigment on this, we're going to use a little bit of black. We have these really cool bug holes down here, which have this sort of like almost burnt look to them. And we still want to have some depth and maintain the visual look of that because it looks pretty awesome. So we're going to use just a little bit of black to make sort of a more of a smoky type of tint to it. Let's just still leave some depth so you can kind of see down in there a little bit. and just sort of mimic the overall black background of those holes. Just kind of accent them a little bit, make it a little bit more useful than a bunch of dust holes for all your sawdust to fall down into. I think that was probably about right. I have a little bit of pigment in there. It's still fairly translucent or transparent, but it's got a little bit of a, it's smoky. We're calling it. That's what all the cool kids call it. All right, we got here, oh, that's actually gonna be pretty cool. It is a little clear, but it's got a little color. I'm just gonna do this because there's so many. Seems like the right thing to do. This little scraper dealy. So we're gonna get started on the base. So I have these two sticks here, which are gonna become the legs. And the biggest thing here is gonna be the final height of the bench. Brad wants a bench that's a little bit taller than mine, but he's gonna add some leveling feet to the bottom of the legs. Once he has it back in his shop, that's gonna add about 1.5 inches. So we're gonna actually make the bench the same height as mine right here, which is currently, it's at 33 inches tall. The final height of your bench is going to depend on a lot of personal features or personal things. The type of work you do, if you're going to be doing a lot of like detail work up high, if you're doing planing, you want to be a little bit more low, maybe at like wrist height or something. And overall, the height of the user plays the biggest factor into the height of the bench. I am fairly short, so my bench is fairly close to the ground. If you're a lot taller than me, you probably want a taller bench. So we're going to take the thickness of the top and we'll subtract that from our desired height. And that'll be our final length on the leg. In our case, I'm gonna be cutting these roughly down to 32. That'll give us a couple extra inches of extra length to get down to our final length later on once we do our final cuts. And our final length on the legs for this is going to be 28.5. So that plus a little tenon we're gonna have, and then the thickness of the top should leave us with a final height of 33. So I got one leg out of that short piece back there, and then this one here is an 8-foot stick. And that should give us our last 3 pieces. We'll get rid of this felling wedge up there. We'll have one leg here. We'll have one leg here. Look at a tape measure, just magically has all the numbers there for you. How fancy is that thing? So next we need the material for all the rails. So we have 6 rails on this bench. We have the upper rail, the lower rail, and then we have the front and back long rails. And those rails are gonna really set the overall width of the bench and then the overall length of the base, which is going to give you your overhangs. So depending on the type of work you do again, your vices, that configuration and everything, is going to tell you how much overhang you actually need. This one here is about 20, and the other end over there is about 15. And for Brad's bench, what we're going to do is make them symmetrical, because in this case, I need the longer overhang over here for the bench grafted tail vise. We'll be doing a different vise for Brad's bench, so we don't need all the overhang over here. We're just going to shift the extra overhang from this side to that side just to make it symmetrical. So I have the stock for the rails here, and I'm going to go ahead and lay these out as well. So I got one short one down here. This middle area here will give us that long one, and that'll leave me with a short one down here. From this other board here, I'm going to pull a long one here out of the middle, right here. And now leaving with an offcut down here, which would be a short one. And we have another offcut from the leg stock, which will produce the 4th short rail. So we'll start building things up to get them squared up and down to final dimension, width, whatever you want to call it, width and thickness. So we're gonna get started on the joinery with the legs first. It's gonna be all the mortises and the holes for the barrel nuts. So I've laid out the mortises for all of the rails to connect to based off the plans. So we have our tenons here. So we have a pair of mortises here in the faces. That's gonna be for the short rails. We have a mortise here in the edge. That's gonna be for the connecting rails, the long ones. And then on the other edge, we have two holes here. It's gonna be for the barrel nuts that are gonna allow us to disassemble the bench and have the two side assemblies connect to the, I guess to the rails, the long rails, and they can be disassembled for transport. So since I already laid this out on one of the legs, I can transfer all my layout lines to all the other ones and get started. So we just have a little bit of cleanup work here around the base of the tenon to get everything flushed up and ready to go. So I'm just gonna pare that stuff out of here and then we can move on from there. Okay, shoulders are all pretty well cleaned up, I think. No high spots so far. A little right there, actually. Oh yeah, there it is. Oop. Okay, it's all cleaned up. So we have round-ended mortises. So I'm not going to square up the mortises. We're going to square up the tenons. Nope, we're going to round over the tenons. Words. So I'm using this pretty aggressive rasp, but it has a safety edge, so I can actually hold it down here on the shoulder and not have to worry about digging into it. This leaves me with like a little bit of a lamb's tongue kind of thing at the bottom. So this flush cut saw will sever the fibers. I can come back with a chisel and remove that last little bit of waste. Okay, now we can start fine tuning the actual fit of the tenon into the mortise. A little more. Hey, it went in. Okay, there we go. Mortise and tenon. Giant mortise and tenon. I'll get the other ones in here and see how the base looks. There we go. There's our base all joined together. We're not done yet, though. We have a little more work to do on this thing. We're going to do the stud tenons on top of the legs. So we'll see the top next. And while we take this thing apart, we'll also drill the holes to peg all of these short rails in place. So now it's just about time for some assembly, or at least working towards some kind of final assembly. So we'll be draw boring the legs and the rails together, and the draw boring process is going to give us some pretty cool advantages. We'll be able to assemble this thing without any clamps, and those joints will be as tight as you could possibly make them. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to pull this frame back into exactly the position it's in when we transfer the holes from the legs to the rails. So we want to make sure that this assembly is dead on exactly where we want it to be, because once we put those pegs through, that's kind of where it's going to be. So a couple of things, of course, you want to make sure this thing is clamped together nice and square. Everything's looking nice and good in that kind of thought. The lower rail should be parallel to the floor, so we can check that with a square here. Just make sure it's parallel on both sides and it's the right distance off the floor so it's even with all the other ones. And almost more importantly of all the little things is going to be this top rail, making sure it's nice and flush to the top of the legs, to the top of that stub tendon shoulder, making sure those are exactly where they want to be. Once we're happy with the final position, we can mark the hole locations onto the tendons. So you can use a transfer punch, or if you have a brad point drill bit, you can use the center point on the brad to actually mark that location. So I can just stick this thing down in the hole, give it a few little tappy taps, and that'll mark my hole center. With those center parts marked, you can take this thing apart and actually drill the real holes for the draw bore. So I will shift the hole location closer to the shoulder by about 1/16 of an inch. That's going to give us that offset in the holes. So when that peg goes through there, it's going to pull that tenon deeper into the mortise as that peg is trying to line up those holes. So Brad would like some hold-fast storage on the 3 legs. They're not going to have the leg vites, so I will drill those hold-fast holes now while the legs are, by themselves and don't have a whole workbench attached to them. Over on the front left leg is where the leg vise is going to go. It's going to be a lot easier to drill any holes, do any work on that leg now while it's separate from the rest of the bench than when the whole bench is assembled and you're trying to install a leg vise into it. You can certainly do all these operations with the bench assembled. It's just going to be way more easy and way less of a hassle to do all that stuff now in preparation for further work in the future. And a few last little details that I'll take care of while this thing is taken apart. Brad wants a few ornamental chamfer details on a few of the pieces, so I'll add those now while it's a lot easier. I'll also cut a groove in the back of the lower rail. That's going to receive a cleat for a future shelf or under bench storage system. Again, easier to do that now than in the future when this thing is fully assembled. So I got this thing dry assembled just to kind of make sure and confirm that I've done everything that needs to happen before this thing gets glued up, and I feel good. Everything is finished prepped on the inside surfaces. The top surface is left because we still have to drive these pegs in here and clean those up. So this will be sanded flush afterwards, but everything else is sanded and pretty much ready to go. I got all my holes everywhere that I could possibly need, and I'm ready to go for the actual assembly. And to do that, we're going to use these pegs that I made. So the accent wood on this bench is cherry, so my pegs are made from cherry, and these are made with a dowel plate. And the thing about dowel plates and making your dowels that way and driving a square peg through a round hole is that does not produce a pretty dowel. It produces a strong dowel because the grain fibers are going to follow their way through that hole. So you have continuous grain from top to bottom with a dowel made through a dowel plate. You don't have to worry about any grain run out. And one of the biggest things with this is we're going to use a significant amount of force to send these dowels through those tenons. And the dowel plate's a good way to kind of weed out the bad ones as you're working, because sometimes as you're hammering those things through the dowel plate, the dowel will fail mid-production, which is where I'd want them to fail. The place I don't want them to fail is in the middle of a glue up when I'm trying to hammer this thing through my actual workpiece. And the glue's setting up and you start freaking out trying to extract a busted off dowel out of a hole, which you're probably not going to be able to do. So technically glue is not required on this joint because all your strength is going to come from those dowels, but you know, why not put a little glue on there just to make everybody feel good? Okay, a little glue inside the dowel holes. And I have a little angle on the end so I can feed these things through a little easier because it's got to get around the little half moon shape. Sucks it right in. All right, that's never coming apart ever again. Pull it right back into alignment. This looks really nice. I guess I will do the other one now. So now we're on to the last part of getting this base assembled, and that is going to be for the knockdown hardware. Brad wants this to be knockdownable so you can move it whenever he moves. So the hardware we're going to use are a couple of long bolts. Those will go in those holes right there. It's only holes that go into the end of the tenon, into the long rail, and intersect with a cross dowel, which would be inside the rail. Now it shouldn't be that hard to drill this long hole nice and straight because we already drilled the starter holes in the legs. So now all we have to do is just come back with the drill bit, start in that hole and just follow it. And we should be able to drill nice and straight all the way down as deep as we need for the bolt to get down to the threaded area for the cross dowel. And then once we have our fully drilled holes in there, we can take everything apart and drill a hole through the back side of the rail for the actual cross dowel to slip down into. So there is the completed base all ready to receive the top. So I think that's what we'll do next. We'll get a top attached to this thing and it'll actually look like a workbench. So I'm going to flip the top slabs upside down and lay my base on top of the slabs. That's going to allow me to line up the slabs to the base and transfer the location of the stub tenons from the base into the underside of the workbench. And while it's upside down, I'll also transfer the mounting locations for those bolts so those can get drilled and tapped as well. So a little bit of mortising, and then a little bit of drilling and tapping, and then the tops can actually get flipped right side up with the base right side up and actually attached. And that'll be almost it. Not quite, but almost. So the last bit of major work is to trim the bench down to final length now that the two tops are mounted to the base. I'm going to use the beam saw for this, but this can also be done in 2 passes with a regular circular saw. There is a good chance that those cuts won't line up, so you may have to do a little bit of cleanup work. If you have a long enough flush trim bit, you can use a flush trim bit to trim one cut flush to another. And there are also jigs you can make that wrap around the entire bench top, which make it a lot easier to get your cuts to line up perfectly. But if things don't line up perfect and things aren't exactly right, just grab some 60 grit on your sander and just go to town and finesse and clean up things. And also if your cuts don't have perfectly square, you can also sand them into square and just tweak things after you make the cut. So this is looking pretty darn awesome. This is basically it for the basic bench. And from here, I'm just going to do a little bit of touch-up work, cleanup work, and make it all finessed and finished. So I'm going to break all of the corners that are left, and then I'll apply a little bit of finish. I'm going to use some Armor Seal because I have a can of it that's old and kind of goopy. And that's really the best finish to use on a bench for the shop. It's just whatever you want to get rid of. There's no reason to buy something new if you just got some stuff sitting around that's been sitting around for too long. I'm going to apply 1 coat of Armor Seal just to give the bench a little bit of resilience, help it resist picking up any glue or stains or like dyes or whatever that might spill on the bench, just to give it a little bit of liquid protection like that, and just make it a little more durable. And of course, in the case of this wood, bring some of it to life because some of it's got some pretty ridiculously awesome looking figure, and a finish is going to help to bring that figure out. Whew. There we go. That is some crazy wood. Wow. So that right there is the basic Roubo. If you think about the Roubo workbench as more of a platform, you can kind of see that you kind of start at this point and you can add and modify things to your particular liking or your particular work style. So of course, we already made one decision that sort of changes things. There's two paths. There's a split top and then there is a solid top. But from there, you can really add and modify things. So in future videos, we'll add some very common accessories to this thing. We'll add a gap stop in here, which will fill the space in and make it more functional if you're not always using it to put clamps through, to clamp things out in the middle of the workbench. We will add a shelf, and then later on we'll be building a tool cabinet to go down there in the bottom to give you some more storage space. We'll be adding a sliding dead man to allow you to support workpieces that are longer in conjunction with a leg vise. And speaking of vices, that's where you can really shake things up and do a whole lot of different things. So we're going to do a DIY kick wheel style leg vise for, which side am I on here? This side. This is a right-handed bench for a right-handed user. So the leg vise will go right there on this side. And then of course, on the other end where we showed this, we have the twin screw, the twin turbo vise, which is going to go down here and act as a tail vise. That's going to work in conjunction with the dog holes that we'll put in the top. So you can pinch things between the vise and the dog, or you can put hold fast anywhere on the top of the bench. And maybe we'll come up with some other accessory. There's quite a lot that you can do with this thing. So if you want to build your own, I do have a full set of plans available on my website. That's over at mattcremona.com. Those are based off of the block sizes, essentially, of all the pieces. So if you want to glue up your own parts, you can do that. Or if you want to buy one of my kits, those are available on the site as well to build one of these sexy looking workbenches. I think Brad's gonna like this. I kind of like it more than mine. So that's gonna do it for this one. Thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments on the split top Roubo workbench or anything here in the shop, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, happy working.